I think the sooner they go, literally leave the country, the better it will be.
The glittering chandeliers of Buckingham Palace have long cast brilliant reflections over the centuries-old tapestries, masking the cold and calculated power plays that unfold beneath their light. For decades, the grandeur of the British monarchy has relied heavily on its ability to project absolute unity, a flawless facade carefully curated for the public eye, where every smile is rehearsed and every gesture is measured. However, on one particular evening during a high-profile royal banquet hosted by King Charles to reaffirm the stability of his reign, that meticulously crafted illusion shattered within a matter of seconds. The grand hall was filled with the cream of British society, powerful foreign dignitaries, and long-time aristocratic sponsors whose wealth and influence kept the wheels of the royal machinery turning smoothly. Among the crowd stood Laura Lopes, the daughter of Queen Camilla, an elegant yet historically peripheral figure who had spent most of her adult life navigating the perilous boundaries of being royal adjacent but never truly royal. On this night, clad in a sleek, figure-hugging black gown with her hair swept up in a tight, commanding bun, Laura decided she would no longer play the role of the silent, invisible shadow. As princess and the fiercely traditional and uncompromising sister of the king, swept through the hall with her trademark resolute posture, the space between the two women shrank to a mere 2 meters. What happened next was not the customary polite nod or a choreographed aristocratic smile. Instead, Laura locked eyes with the Princess Royal, delivering a cold, unyielding, and openly defiant stare that would later be described by insiders as the ultimate declaration of war. It was a single, frozen moment of pure animosity that sent an instantaneous shiver through the immediate circle of onlookers, capturing a deep-seated resentment that had been brewing behind closed doors for more than a generation. A royal photographer, positioned at the perfect angle, captured this fleeting interaction, exposing a raw look of defiance from Laura met with an expression of sharp displeasure and surprise from Princess and, within an hour, despite the palace's draconian rules regarding the sharing of internal imagery, the photograph leaked to the internet, triggering a digital wildfire across social media platforms and forcing the British press to dub it the death stare. This explosive public leak was merely the catalyst for an underlying struggle that had deep roots in the complex history of the Parker Bowles integration into the House of Windsor. To understand the sheer gravity of Laura's defiant gaze, one must look closely at how the royal family operates not just as a political institution, but as an exclusive bloodline that guards its inner sanctum with fierce ferocity. Princess Anne had never made a secret of her deep-seated disapproval regarding the rapid elevation of Camilla's children within the social hierarchy of the United Kingdom. To Anne, the monarchy was a sacred trust built on sacrifice, lineage, and duty, a pristine fortress that should never be compromised by introducing outside factions who sought to capitalize on royal proximity without bearing the actual weight of the crown. For years, Laura and her brother had been treated as unofficial shadows, invited to major events out of necessity, but systematically reminded of their place at the bottom of the aristocratic hierarchy through cold glances, subtle snubs, and exclusionary protocols. They were expected to be grateful for the crumbs of prestige thrown their way, to smile for the cameras, and to remain silent while the true bloodlines dominated the narrative. However, the dynamics shifted dramatically when King Charles ascended the throne and began facing severe health challenges, creating a perceived vacuum of authority that Queen Camilla silently sought to utilize for the long-term security of her own children. Laura, an ambitious art curator with deep connections in the elite circles of London, began appearing with unusual frequency at high-profile charity events, environmental seminars, and exclusive art exhibitions, often flanked by some of the monarchy's most influential financial benefactors. This sudden, unapproved expansion of influence did not escape the watchful eye of Princess Anne, who viewed Laura's maneuvers not as charitable endeavors, but as a calculated, subterranean invasion of royal territory. The morning following the banquet brought an ominous, suffocating silence to Laura's private residence in Kensington, as the warm London sunlight filtered through her curtains, offering no comfort against the brewing storm. The digital world was screaming with headlines about her defiance, but her personal phone remained completely dead, an artificial quiet that signaled the immediate activation of the palace's isolation protocols. When she opened her laptop to check her business schedule, her worst fears were confirmed. 3 major invitations to prestigious art exhibitions had been abruptly rescinded under flimsy, manufactured excuses regarding scheduling conflicts. More devastatingly, a prominent Swiss billionaire investor who had spent the last 2 years negotiating a massive partnership with her gallery sent a curt, one-line email suspending all future contracts without offering a single word of apology. Laura stood in her room, gripping her device, realizing with terrifying clarity how swiftly and mercilessly the aristocratic elite could sever a person's lifelines when the royal family signaled their displeasure. London's high society was a tightly controlled ecosystem where proximity to royal favor dictated survival, and with a single defiant look, Laura had transformed herself into social poison. Driven by a mixture of panic and righteous anger, she immediately contacted Queen Camilla, whose voice over the line sounded deeply exhausted, carrying the heavy burden of a mother who knew her daughter had crossed an invisible, highly dangerous line. Camilla revealed that immediately after the banquet, Princess Anne had bypassed all standard channels, marching directly into King Charles's private quarters to lodge a furious, uncompromising complaint, and had argued passionately that Laura's public behavior was a direct challenge to the authority of the crown, a calculated attempt to force her way into a position of privilege that she had no legal or traditional right to occupy, and made it clear that if Charles did not act decisively to suppress this rebellion, the integrity of the Windsor line would be fundamentally compromised, leaving the king with no choice but to authorize an immediate administrative lockdown on Laura's social movements. Despite the crushing weight of these immediate sanctions, the conversation between Camilla and Laura did not devolve into defeatism. Instead, it ignited a darker, far more dangerous flame of ambition that had been quietly nurtured for years. Sitting in the shadows of her Kensington apartment later that evening, surrounded by the remnants of her compromised career, Laura listened as her mother outlined a covert strategy for a long-term counteroffensive. Camilla admitted that she had long realized the traditional royals would never willingly grant them true acceptance or permanent status, meaning they had to build their own independent power base, using the very connections the monarchy relied upon. The plan was no longer to beg for titles or permission from King Charles or to appease the hostile demands of Princess Anne. Instead, they would launch an underground campaign to build an untouchable network within high society, leveraging emotional charity speeches and elite art circles to capture the loyalty of major sponsors. Camilla believed that if Laura could establish herself as an indispensable figure among the ultra-wealthy elite, the royal family would eventually be forced to recognize her position out of sheer necessity, regardless of bloodline purity. Laura fully embraced this high-stakes game, her initial fear transforming into a cold, calculated determination to dismantle the exclusionary walls that had kept her in the shadows for so long. She felt a profound sense of liberation in knowing that the battle lines were officially drawn, and that her defiant look at the banquet was not an impulsive error, but the opening salvo of a profound struggle to redefine the rules of aristocratic power in modern Britain. The underground resistance orchestrated by Queen Camilla and Laura Lopes began to take shape in the weeks following the devastating initial sanctions, operating completely outside the traditional parameters of the court. In the deep secrecy of their late-night meetings, surrounded by documents detailing the financial structures of London's elite charities, the mother and daughter duo systematically mapped out a high-stakes network expansion. Laura knew that her survival in high society depended entirely on her ability to transform her image from an excluded royal appendage into an indispensable cultural and philanthropic powerhouse. They began targeting secondary and tertiary aristocratic circles, wealthy industrialists, international tech billionaires, and old money families who felt increasingly alienated by Princess Anne's rigid, old-fashioned definition of royal patronage. Camilla utilized her internal knowledge of palace operations to discreetly steer these powerful figures toward Laura's independent art and charity projects, passing messages through trusted, non-royal intermediaries who left no paper trail. This was a sophisticated, multi-layered infiltration game, where every invitation extended and every conversation held was designed to build an impenetrable fortress of social influence. Laura's subsequent public appearances were no longer passive duties. They were masterclasses in strategic public relations, where she spoke eloquently about contemporary global issues, blending modern progressive philanthropy with the subtle mystique of her proximity to the throne. As Laura's underground network grew in strength and financial backing, the dynamic between her independent movement and the official palace infrastructure entered a highly volatile phase. Emboldened by their rapid success, Camilla and Laura decided to escalate the conflict by implementing a much more aggressive and dangerous psychological strategy targeted directly at the royal family's vulnerabilities. They began orchestrating a quiet, sophisticated whisper campaign across London's elite clubs and selected independent media outlets, subtly shifting the public narrative surrounding the internal dynamics of the monarchy. Carefully planted articles and blind items began surfacing on social media, presenting Laura not as a rebellious instigator, but as a modern, progressive victim of an antiquated, vindictive royal establishment. These narratives indirectly painted Princess and as a deeply conservative, out-of-touch institutional gatekeeper whose obsession with bloodline purity was actively damaging the monarchy's ability to connect with modern society. Rumors began to circulate that the Princess Royal was deliberately fabricating internal crises and manipulating King Charles to consolidate her own personal authority during a time of royal vulnerability. Laura masterfully amplified these sentiments during private gatherings with key financial sponsors, suggesting that the current royal administration was fearful of independent, capable outsiders who possessed the vision to modernize British philanthropy. This double-edged strategy of building an autonomous power base while simultaneously undermining the moral authority of her chief rival created a heavy, toxic atmosphere of paranoia within the corridors of St. James's Palace. Princess N, however, possessed an ironclad instinct for institutional self-defense and was not a figure who could be easily blindsided by subterranean maneuvers. As the veiled press reports and malicious rumors grew louder, her counterintelligence network inside the aristocracy quickly traced the origins of the negative publicity back to Laura's immediate circle, and viewed this coordinated whisper campaign not merely as a personal insult, but as a treasonous attempt to subvert the traditional foundations of the monarchy and force the sovereign into a position of weakness. She immediately summoned her most loyal security advisors and private secretaries to her office, instructing them to launch an exhaustive, covert investigation into the financial lifelines of Laura's newly formed alliance. Anne's agents meticulously scrutinized private bank accounts, non-traditional charity registries, and discreet communication channels, uncovering the undeniable trail of Queen Camilla's hidden hand in redirecting royal benefactors toward her daughter's cause. Armed with a comprehensive, undeniable dossier of evidence that detailed the exact mechanics of the whisper campaign and the names of the co-opted sponsors, Princess Anne prepared to deliver a decisive, fatal blow to the rebellion. She requested an emergency, closed-door council meeting with King Charles, ensuring that no advisors loyal to Camilla could intercept the communication or soften the impending impact. On a stormy evening inside the palace, Anne laid the extensive files on the king's desk, her voice cutting through the heavy silence with chilling precision as she explained how the internal subversion was actively threatening the stability of the crown. She demanded an immediate, total operational shutdown of Laura's public existence and a drastic reduction of Camilla's internal influence, forcing King Charles to choose between family peace and the preservation of the Windsor legacy. The confrontation inside the king's private quarters left no room for compromise, as the undeniable weight of Princess Anne's evidence forced a historical turning point within the House of Windsor. King Charles, visibly broken by the operational subversion taking place beneath his own roof and acutely aware of his declining health, realized that allowing Camilla's rogue faction to expand would permanently splinter the monarchy. Within 48 hours of that fateful meeting, a decree was drafted behind closed doors, formulated with a cold legal precision that stripped Laura Lopes of any remaining public leverage. This official notice, delivered directly to the Kensington residents, demanded an immediate and unconditional cessation of all public activities, prohibiting Laura from using any royal connections, entering elite philanthropic platforms, or maintaining contact with the crown's traditional sponsors. Princess and personally oversaw the execution of these terms, ensuring that the heavy hand of the state machine clamped down tightly on the network Laura and Camilla had spent months building. In a parallel administrative maneuver, Queen Camilla's internal influence was drastically curtailed, reducing her status to a strictly ceremonial role and systematically removing her loyalists from key decision-making positions within the palace. Facing her husband in a silent room, Camilla attempted to appeal for her daughter's survival, arguing that Laura merely sought a legitimate place to stand within the shifting landscape of modern Britain. However, the king remained unyielding, stating that boundaries had been crossed and that the preservation of the Windsor lineage would always supersede personal or marital allegiances. The institutional retaliation was swift and absolute, echoing through the exclusive clubs and high society corridors of London like a controlled implosion. The elite financial backers, billionaires, and international art investors who had previously flirted with Laura's independent movement immediately sensed the shifting winds of royal favor and initiated a rapid retreat. Apologetic emails, manufactured excuses regarding strategic repositioning, and sudden contractual cancellations flooded Laura's gallery desk, transforming her overnight from a rising cultural powerhouse into social contraband. Recognizing the futility of fighting a battle against the combined power of princess and the sovereign, Laura made the painful decision to execute a complete and total withdrawal from the United Kingdom. She closed her prominent public gallery in central London, stored her unfinished canvases away from the prying eyes of the paparazzi, and sold her residence to escape the suffocating gaze of the British media. Packing her life into a few secure cases, she crossed the border to live in deep isolation, away from the lavish galas and calculated power plays that had defined her recent years. Back in London, the palace maintained an icy facade of tranquility, with Princess Anne continuing to stand as the unflinching guardian of tradition while a profound, permanent silence settled between King Charles and a deeply resentful Queen Camilla. The silent war had ended with a devastating victory for the old guard, but the deep internal fractures left behind served as a permanent reminder of the immense cost of challenging the crown.
Laura Lopes must immediately cease all public activities related to the royal family. No participation in any charity events under the royal name, no joint appearances with royal family members, and no use of any connections associated with Buckingham Palace. Princess Anne was the strongest advocate. Right after receiving